Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. It's interesting because all the people I've been working with, I've worked with all the speakers who are coming up on this spot, and several of them yesterday said to me, "That's a really intimidating place to be. This is my first time to stand here with lights, darkness, and all the rest." But today what I want to talk to you about is this whole concept of personalized learning. And I want to contextualize it. So I'm not going to go into technical details. I'm not going to present a platform. Those pieces are critical. Dr. Covington spoke yesterday about the platform, the system that the Educational Achievement Authority is about to roll out in Michigan. Jim Rickabaugh, who's coming up. Phenomenal action research in the classroom, figuring out specifically kind of the technical aspects of how to do this, how to bring teachers along so they can personally connect with students. What I want to talk today is about what a personalized learning classroom actually looks like for a student. So, you can please go to the slides. So personalized learning, what I want to tie as the goal of personalized learning is college and career readiness. What's meant by that? There's a lot to think about it. I'm going to describe college and career readiness in a minute. But to begin with, you can see up here my son Dominic playing Angry Birds. So watch Dominic playing Angry Birds. And within this, I want you to think about our young students today and how they learn, how they engage. So Dominic just finished first grade, about to go in second grade. He loves Angry Birds. How many in here have played Angry Birds? I'm shocked to not see all the hands. Slightly addictive, right? So the interesting thing about Angry Birds, or about a video game, let's just talk about video games. Illustration is Angry Birds. First piece is, before Dominic could even read, he'd figured out how to use, my iPad, how to use touch. He could care less about joysticks. He gets on it. Immediately he discovers mastery levels. And so level by level by level, he keeps wanting to attain mastery, to perfect it. And so, once again, before he could even read, he's finishing 70 levels of Angry Birds and really proud about it. So first piece, mastery. Second piece, self-pacing. Dominic doesn't play Angry Birds at my pace, he plays Angry Birds at his pace. If he wants to go fast, if he wants to go slow, if he wants to set it down, go play out on the yard, whatever it is, he sets the pace of his engagement towards his mastery. And the third piece is practice. So if you watch him up here, the moment he knows he's not going to succeed at this level, he immediately resets it. Now, funny thing is, for my generation, I come to it and I feel as though I have to shoot all 4 birds. Even though I know I'm not going to make it, I have to complete it. Dominic's generation, screw it, reset, try again. So think about this. As we talk about personalized learning, mastery, self-pacing, practice. So, I want to set up a premise that college and career readiness can define equity work in the 21st century. Why is that? So when we talk about equity, we're primarily talking about difference. Now, I grew up in a school, in a community where 95% of my teachers were the same as me, racially, ethnically, religiously, socioeconomically. Both my parents were teachers. I grew up the norm. And so it was typical for me to look around around in my environment and see very similar things. That no longer exists. Not even within white communities is there total homogeneity as there was when I was growing up. And so difference is moving towards the norm. So when I talk about equity, first and foremost, I'm talking about race. But I'm talking about a lot of other things as well. I'm talking about socioeconomics. I'm talking about gender. I'm talking about learning styles. I'm talking about language. And so equity fundamentally becomes, what do we do within our school systems to support all students in an adequate educational preparation? So what I want to throw out is this idea of college and career readiness as the goal. One of the challenges around education is we've lacked a clear goal. Go to school till you're 18, get your butt in the seat, get your Carnegie units, and then you get a diploma. What does the diploma mean? It's definitely a piece of paper. Now, college and career readiness redefines this. College and career readiness. What are the skills, the knowledge sets, the essential learnings I need so that when I leave high school, I'm prepared to take on college? This is about the elimination of remedial classes at the college level. It also means, what if I decide not to go to college? What if I want to go into a vocational program? You know what? I'm prepared. It's college and career readiness, not just college readiness. It's setting students up for success. So, what I'd like to propose is that the goal of college and career readiness starts to define an equitable education. As a teacher with students in the classroom, I can't guarantee that my student is going to succeed throughout their entire life. But I can guarantee they're fully prepared to take life on. So college and career readiness. Now, I want all of you to do an activity. Take a piece of paper, a little note. I want you to take about 30 seconds. I'm going to give you that 30 seconds to think about a memorable lesson from your K-12 experience. So what is a lesson? What is a memorable lesson? I can talk over an audience, wherever my mic went. What is a memorable lesson? I'll bring it down again. What is a memorable lesson you experienced in your K-12 education? And I want you to check yes or no to 4 characteristics of that lesson. So take about 30 seconds, think about this lesson. Think about it in detail. Okay, now I want you to consider 4 characteristics, and this is the yes or no. Number 1, was that memorable lesson delivered by a great teacher? Yes or no? Second, was there a clear learning goal within that learning experience? So it wasn't random, you really knew what you were trying to learn when you engaged in that learning experience. Yes or no? Third, were you at all involved in the choices around this lesson? Were you driven towards a level of quality, choosing what you're going to do, how you're going to engage with this, and then being driven to a level of quality? So your own engagement, the choice piece, yes or no, with this memorable lesson. Fourth piece, did you know why you were learning this? Was it relevant? Did it have meaning to you that you were clearly aware of? You could connect it to your life and to your future. Yes or no? Okay, so by raise of hands, how many people with this memorable learning experience only had one of those characteristics evident within the learning experience? Okay, a couple of you. How many of you had 2 of these characteristics evident within this learning experience, this memorable learning experience? Okay, a few more of you. How many of you had 3 of these characteristics? More. How many had all 4 characteristics? So the overwhelming majority of you are within that 3 to 4 characteristics. Now, the reason why I throw this out is because all of you have experienced personalized learning. These are critical components of it. We're going to break this down. So remember this memorable lesson as we go through this. I want to walk you through a classroom. This was a classroom that we filmed in an urban setting, a historically black neighborhood, very much within the urban core. I'm not going to talk about where it was at. This was a very well-designed or well-thought-through lesson. And standards-based urban core 4th grade classroom. White teacher, all black students. So the standard that they were addressing was to make personal connections with reading, or make personal connections by reading a first-hand account and write an individual narrative about the experience. So within the lesson, the teacher designed it so they would read a story. She found a story on immigration. The students read the story, then they reenacted it. And what's interesting is this story happened to be about Irish immigration in the 1840s. So as they go through this, the teacher says, they're reading about this person who immigrated to America, and it's talking about how they're on this boat. And there's 600 people on a small boat, and it's very cramped. So she has them reenact the story. So she has all of her students come and sit on a small carpet, no bigger than a part of this stage here. And they sit in tight quarters. And then she talks about, so what would it have been like? Can you imagine being in such tight quarters? What if someone was sick next to you? You'd have to stay there next to them. And then she starts asking them questions about the reading experience. She's trying to get them to personally connect to the learning. So the teacher says, a lot of people have been coming to America for a lot of reasons. Students, what are some of those reasons? Students raise their hand and they say, a better life. Another kid says, freedom. Another kid says, it was to live with their own rules, to live their own, to be able to practice their own religion. And the teacher sees this great engagement. It's a challenging lesson. It's well thought through. The teacher put a lot of effort. And so where I struggle in analyzing this lesson is that this is a teacher who put a lot of effort into this lesson. A teacher who's really trying to improve her practice. Can I ask, does anyone see any level of incongruence within this lesson? Raise your hand if you do. Any thoughts? Anyone willing to share with the group what they see? Blacks and Irish. It's an interesting thought. Slavery coming over on the boats. Okay, so take that. Think of, Amistad. Who watched Amistad? You see the people crammed on the boat. Now we're talking about Irish immigrants coming over. So look at that image. That's their boat. All black. Question asked, why'd they come to America? Why'd you come to America? Freedom. A better life. A very well-planned lesson, but disconnected from the students. So I want to analyze this lesson and try to figure out how is it that this lesson could be re-engineered to become deeply personalized and meaningful to the students. There might be a place for reading about Irish immigration in a classroom full of African American students. But what else has to happen around that in order that these students start seeing a personal connection to the story? So think about these things as we go through this. Another piece happened. So the teacher says, they did a math lesson, and they calculated out that based upon the size of the boat, the 600 people on it, there was 3 square feet per person. So the teacher says, let's do an activity around this. Okay, measure out 4 pieces of yarn, each of 3 feet, and make a square and sit in it. That's how much space you would have. What's wrong? What's 3 by 3? 3 times 3. 9. What's 3 square feet? So all the students are building their 9 square foot parcels to experience 3 square feet on the ship. So what happens, with these types of things? These are 4th grade students highly engaged within the lesson. But what happens over time? Bit by bit by bit, what if a student starts saying, what if this doesn't represent me? So it's not as though there were any students that stood up out of this lesson and walked out of the classroom and said, this teacher's full of crap. But this is in a system which continues to see almost 50% dropout rates of its African American male students. So think about how this builds. Where's the disconnect? So I want you to look at this. This graphic here illustrates much of the work, especially that's been done over the last 10 years. And so what's happened within education is that teachers have learned how to find a standard and teach to that standard. So before, it was kind of teachers thinking about, what am I going to deliver to the students? Now, within the last decade, we've come to the point where teachers think, what is the standard I need to deliver? Now, how do I deliver that to my students? That's what happened in this classroom. But let's back out of this a little bit. And let's think about what's wrong with this particular equation. How do we shift this standards-based teaching towards a personalized model? So what personalized learning does, if you consider these two, the standard, in a sense, is in the middle in a standards-based classroom. In a personalized learning environment, the student becomes in the center. So rather than the teacher saying, what's the standard I need to find, and then figure out how to deliver it to my students, in a student-centered environment, the teacher says, what does my student need in relation to the standards? And so it begins with the student first, and then considers all the other elements around it. Now, what a personalized learning program starts moving towards is several things here. First off, personalized learning, to truly be able to get the student in the center of this experience, you have to have a highly effective teacher. You know, when you think about what's happening with the teaching standards, in task, whatnot, there's incredible power within all these skills that teachers are learning how to, effectively execute within their classroom. So a personalized learning environment always begins and ends with an effective teacher. But the next piece here is the standards, the essential learnings. Personalized learning is not about just go figure out anything you want to learn. No, personalized learning is driving towards particular standards. But it's the student's relationship, the student's execution and mastery of those standards that matter, not the teacher's delivery of a lesson that ties to that standard. And so the standards piece becomes critical within a personalized learning environment. But now let's look at another thing, choice and accountability. I remember a school that I once filmed in. This was about 10 years ago. It was an expeditionary learning school. There's actually some phenomenal expeditionary learning schools out there. But this particular school had really focused on this piece of choice. And I remember going into this art class, and this was a 14-year-old student who had decided he wanted to make a mammoth sculpture. And the sculpture was over 12 feet tall. It was the largest art piece I've ever seen in a school that a student was creating on his own. He made the choice to make it, but he was never held accountable to, number one, finishing it, to knowing what he was going to try to do with it, to knowing what was the purpose of this art that he was creating. And so what was interesting was choice was apparent, but accountability wasn't exactly. And the student had gotten bored with the project and moved on to something else. And so this 12-foot sculpture continued to stand in the middle of the art room, yet to be finished. So within a personalized learning environment, choice becomes critical. But if accountability is not held to that choice, accountability towards the standards of learning, then are you really driving the student ultimately towards college and career readiness? But the other piece, and I want you to look at the top there, the culture and relevancy. Now there's a deliberate piece here where instead of saying cultural relevancy, I talk about culture and relevancy. So think back to that classroom in that urban core that I showed. It actually did have an effective teacher who was teaching to the standards, was asking students, doing formative assessments and whatnot, figuring out how the students were learning. The challenge with that lesson was it was devoid of the culture and relevancy. The culture piece is, who are my students? Where do they come from? Can I do an entire experiential learning moment about Irish immigration with a class exclusively of African American students and never say, how does this compare to your family? How did your ancestors come over? How might this be different than people who came over, who were brought over as slaves? Why did you come over? Irish might say freedom. African American might say my ancestor was brought over because of slavery. But the teacher never took the students to that point. And so ultimately what happened, students got a well-delivered lesson, but there was no connection to the student, to their life, to why it matters. When you take culture, which is who the student is and where they come from, you take that out of a lesson, When you take relevancy, why am I actually learning this? Why does this really matter to me? When you start pulling that out of a lesson, no matter how good the setup is, you've now devoided the learning experience of being personalized. So we tend to focus, and very, very justifiably within education, we tend to focus on that effective teacher. We become much, much better at focusing on the standard. We're starting to look and understand how accountability works. Our best teachers know how to pull choice into it. But where learning matters, where students, every student, the 100%, where every student is able to connect with learning and stick with it and not eventually say, does this school represent me or not? The culture and relevancy piece has to be there. And so my premise to you is when you devoid the lesson of deep understanding of the student's culture, who they are and where they come from, and you fail to directly tie it to where the student is going within their life, you've now depersonalized the learning rather than personalizing it. So I want you to think, Dominic and Maya, my two kids. Now, when I think about them within this classroom, what my hope is that the teacher would consider my child and might think, okay, what's your heritage? Now, the interesting thing is, my children might learn something about immigration from Europe as it ties to my heritage. But most important to my child is, where did they come from? So when I think about my children being able to step out in the world as beautiful, beautiful black children, loving life with every interest in learning and success and ambition that I ever had, I have to rely upon a system that will understand who my students are, where they come from, personalize the learning, and connect that learning every single day to who my children actually are. Do I want anything less for my own children than for them to be prepared for college and career? No. I'm desperate for my children to have that. Every parent feels that. It's the responsibility of us as educators to learn how to personalize this environment so that when we talk about 100%, it's not a joke, it's not a slogan, it's a fundamental reality. Every student, college and career ready. When you consider it, it's the only thing we as educators can ever actually promise to our kids. Thank you very much.